The Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has increased the policy rate from 19% to 21%. The MPC has, however, set the interest rate corridor at 300 basis points, which means that the increment will not affect lending rates of banks.
The MPC revealed that the Bank of Ghana's Composite Index of Economic Activity, CIEA, for the third quarter of 2014 suggests a positive year-on-year growth of 7.8% at the end of September 2014, compared with 9.6% in the corresponding period last year. The bank's survey of consumer sentiment in October 2014 also showed that consumers were upbeat about the general economic conditions. The overall index improved to 85.6 from 77.5 recorded in August 2014, while business confidence rebounded with an improved index of 88.7 from 78.6 in the second quarter. But the committee insists vulnerabilities still persist, hence a decision to tighten the monetary policy.
The latest forecast indicates that inflation will continue to remain outside the target band, but expected to ease gradually towards the medium-term target, which we put at 8.0 plus or minus 2%, and we expect to come within that band by the first half of 2016. The inflation target could take a longer duration in excess of 12 quarters to be achieved, considering the vulnerabilities in the economy. The committee decided to maintain the current tight policy stance and at the same time realign rates in the money market within the interest rate corridor. Consequently, the committee took the following decisions: increase the monetary policy rate from 19% to 21% to ensure that the existing tight monetary policy stance is maintained while still operating within the corridor set by the committee.
The MPC, however, explains the new rate will not affect banks' lending rate.
Currently, we have a corridor above the policy rate of 500 basis points, which the Monetary Policy Committee thinks that is too high and doesn't allow us to send the right signals or to the market in terms of monetary policy implementation. So the committee has set a corridor of 300 basis points. If we maintain the policy rate at 19%, whilst ensuring the corridor is 300, that will mean that bringing down the upper end from 24% to 22%, which will really mean loosening of monetary policy. So what we are doing is more of a correction. We are moving the rate up to 21%, but the 24% at which we lend to banks, which also influence how they deal with their customers, is still the same at 24%, because that is the rate at which we will continue to deal with the banks.
Gross international reserves, which at the end of October 2014 stood at $5.9 billion, has meanwhile improved to $6.6 billion as at November 7, 2014, equivalent to 3.8 months of import cover. Abigail Atmakwenchi for Joy News.
So let's talk about this over the next few minutes. With me in the studio are two gentlemen. To my far left is Financial Research Specialist with EcoBank Development Corporation, Suleimana Mohammed. To my immediate left is Certified Economist Daniel Enim Prempe. Welcome to the studio, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Suleimana, because you work directly with the central bank. Are you surprised with the turnout of the policy rate?
Yes, we were surprised because we probably expected it to be maintained, but the decision they made is understandable. And it also highlights the risks to the outlook for the cedi and also inflation. If you look at over the past 2 months, we've seen the cedi stabilize, and mainly due to USD inflows from the Cocoa Board pre-export finance facility and the euro-dollar inflows. But beyond that, news of government's engagement with IMF also impacted positively on investor confidence. However, what we are seeing now is that the the earliest we can expect the conclusion of government engagement of IMF will be ending of this year. Between then and now is a lot of time where this confidence can be undermined. So there was the need for a policy intervention to help continue to stabilize the cedi before the IMF program kicks in. And I see the increase in the prime rate as a way to help support the cedi until the IMF program kicks in.
I see. We'll go into the issues one after the other. But Daniel, what do you think about the policy rate?
All right. From where we sit, one would have expected that the rate would be maintained at 19, you know, just to allow the Bank of Ghana to actually have well-informed analysis of the economy by the end of the year. Then maybe probably when we move to 2015, within that span of time, they can have a proper analysis, proper trend analysis. However, they are the regulators. From their point, they are saying that maybe increasing it will be better. There again, I listened to the Minister of Trade, you know,
on how the war on
Sure.
on interest rate. We'll talk about the interest rate, the impact of all of this on the interest rate. But let's get to the telephone. Dr. Kwame Banyako has joined our conversation. He's Senior Vice President at Strategic Planning and Research with the Royal Bank. Dr. Banyako, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, my sister.
What do you think about the new policy rate?
Well, I'm sure the bank, the MPC, actually, they did review the economy, and I'm sure it was informed by the data they have and the strategic plan that they have, basically in terms of controlling monetary variables. Of course, it has impacts on other sectors of the economy, and these are the things that I think we need to look at. Basically, the monetary policy rate, theoretically, is the rate at which the central bank lends to other banks, which then on-lends to other people, especially when they need their liquidity challenged, which implies that theoretically, when this rate goes up, it means that the cost of funds, as far as the banks are concerned, is also high. It goes up, and it might translate into the rate that they charge when others want money from the banks. But the question then is whether practically the banks are looking at the monetary policy rate, whether in the recent past it has been that effective at informing the bank as to what to do.
Let's try and answer that question, since there are two of you here. I have Suleiman Mohammed from EcoBank as well. Doesn't necessarily inform your lending rates.
Well, I mean, if that is the rate at which the central bank actually lends to the banks, then it will have an effect on the lending rates. But in practice, let me be honest, I think the Treasury bill rate is a more realistic yardstick because that's in practice that's what they do. That's how high, because I think they also have a history to that. It looks like some banks used to borrow at a low rate from the central bank and then turn around and buy Treasury bills at a higher rate. So if there's a margin between the policy rate, a high margin between the policy rate and the Treasury bill rate, then more or less government is paying interest on his own money. And so the central bank practically lends to you at virtually the what should I say, the Treasury bill rate. In that case, changes to the monetary policy rate probably do not mean much if that is what happens in practice, because now probably the banks would rather borrow from themselves. And so that's why you see, for instance, the interbank rate is lower currently as per the central bank's own figures. The interbank rate is lower than the Treasury bill rate. So if the central bank will give you money at the Treasury bill rate, you might as well borrow from your friends. And so the policy rate then becomes irrelevant in decision making.
Dr. Banyako, I'm going to have you host the line. Sulemana, what would be your view on that?
Well, having looked at the rate at which the central bank lends to commercial bank, the governor indicated that that wouldn't change. So lending rates are likely to remain unchanged. That could be partly true, but when you look at it holistically, banks' lending rates are being influenced by their cost of funding, and the sources of funding goes beyond what they borrow from the central bank. For instance, with interest rates going up and treasury bill rate likely to go up tomorrow, what that means is that people who deposit with the banks are also going to ask for higher rates on their deposits, which will raise the cost of funding for banks. And when that happens, they have to reflect it in their lending rate as well.
So it won't be realistic for the Bank of Ghana, or it's not realistic, as the Bank of Ghana has already told us that because there is interest rate corridor, we shouldn't expect lending rates when we borrow from banks to go up.
Well, it could go up slightly because...
Still within the corridor though.
Well, because the cost of funding for banks is likely to go up. That is if they raise the interest rates on deposits, which is a source of funding for them. Unless the banks are also deciding to keep deposit rates where they are, which is unlikely, given that the interest rate on treasury bills are likely to go up shortly.
So my point is, what the Bank of Ghana has told us is not exactly realistic.
Well, I will say, well,
I mean, in theory, perhaps it is, but in practice, we can't make it. We can't
be sure of that in practice. That lending rate wouldn't change. We can't be sure of that.
Dr. Baniako, the Bank of Ghana says that it has created a corridor, interest rate corridor of 300 basis points. Therefore, we shouldn't expect that interest rates should go up when we borrow from the commercial banks. Do you find it realistic in practice, really?
Well, like my brother said, I mean, the formula for determining even your base rate is given the cost of borrowing, the cost of funds, and the cost of your own operations. And this sometimes depends on how the banks themselves are behaving and where they are getting their funding from. If they get low cost funds in the medium term, or if even they are expecting the cost of funds, that's the borrowing from the private sector. Let's say somebody comes in with some money to, invest in fixed deposits. With an increase in the rates, if people are expecting rates to go up, they will be asking for higher, interest on the money they are giving to the banks. And the banks it means that the cost of funds to the banks would have gone up. And so we will then use the new cost of funds to calculate our base rate. And my sister, you understand what happens then. It means that cost will go up. So realistically, I don't think it is wholly true that we shouldn't expect interest rates to go up. It is possible that it will go up. The issue, more or less, the margin by which it will go up.
Now let's now that we've established that interest rate could indeed go up by some margins. I mean, we're here to know how that will happen. What will be the rolling ball effect on the rest of the economy if we have interest rate going up? Prempe.
Right. Basically, if the lending rate or the interest rate is going up, what it means that the cost of borrowing as an entrepreneur, as a business enterprise or an individual, what it means is that the net effect, okay, if you are borrowing from a bank A at a so-and-so rate, now that the rate is likely to increase, what it means is that it's going to affect your cost of operation. And what it means is that, of course, as an entrepreneur or a business enterprise whose aim is to maximize profit, will in a way, push the incremental effect to the final consumer. So what it means that at the end of the day, the cost of goods and services is going to increase. And what it means is that it's going to affect income too as well. And if you are not careful, labor will then demand for more from government. So, if this trend should continue, one what I expected that we should expect more labor agitation in the economy. And what it means is that if this is not well controlled, it will affect productivity. And the end result is that it will affect the GDP at the end of the year.
Suleiman.
Okay, having looked at that, I mean, of course, there are both positives and negatives. But looking at the positive side, the increase in the rate is going to help reduce the risks of foreign investor exit from the Ghanaian market. Because basically, foreign investors will have options of countries to invest in, and they decided to invest in Ghana. But as our fundamentals were weakening, they had to now compare Ghana with their existing options, or we needed to give them higher interest rate to compensate for the risks that they were taking. And raising the prime rate will help reduce that risk. But on the local investor front, what that means is that the real interest rate on CD-denominated assets is going to increase, because as inflation was going up, what it means is that real interest rates were contracting. So raising the rates on the money market is going to preserve the real interest rate for local investors.
But the Bank of Ghana seems to give some reasons for wanting to tighten the policy rates, because it's targeting inflation as well. I mean, among other things. So it's not exactly all gloom and doom, is it, Dr. Banyako?
The issue then is what is the cause of this increased inflation and the pressures that are being exerted on the economy? I mean, I think the Bank of Ghana pointed to one area that we are missing out on the discussion, basically the fiscal policy stance of the government. I mean, if government is prepared to pay 25% and above on its borrowings from the domestic economy, why would any bank lend below 25%? And so maybe one of the things we need to be looking at is the government's fiscal policy stance. I mean, the Bank of Ghana recounted the situation in terms of rising public debt, which doesn't give enough confidence to the business sector. And these are things that we need to look at. Government is not able to collect the revenues that it budgeted for. Even though expenditures are not getting up to the levels it budgeted for, it's still creating a deficit. And these deficits will have to be funded one way or the other through government borrowing. And which means that government is crowding out the private sector, competing with the private sector for the resources on the market. So maybe the Bank of Ghana, the government and the business community will need to realize that it's not just about what the banks are doing. It is not the interest of the banks to continually increase interest rates, but maybe government is, also has a role to play in the way it conducts its fiscal policy, and maybe how the Bank of Ghana also accommodates fiscal policy activities of the central government. If you look at money supply, the increase in money supply between January and August this year, based on the report that we received yesterday from the Bank of Ghana, it shows that money supply has been on the increase, probably to fund public spending. So maybe all these things are the things that we need to be looking at, how to ensure that we remain fiscally disciplined as a country, so that it doesn't force government to borrow excessively on the domestic market, which then competes with the private sector for the limited funds that are available.
But is it possible for government to withdraw from domestic borrowing?
It is not.
In our context?
It is about controlling it. There is no way in the world that government can withdraw from the borrowing from the domestic market. We are saying that is that paid explained by, let's say, improving productivity, output, and is the money going into investments which will then yield returns, or just those borrowings are going into recurrent expenditure? If it is going to recurrent expenditure and it's not going to yield immediate or long-term investment returns, then the economy is the one that stands to lose, because it's in pushing interest rates up. It then affects, as my brother in the studio said, it affects the cost of business for the domestic investors. And that's not something that we want to do, get involved in the long term.
I'm going to come back to you on this, but just hold the line for me. So if we're pushing the policy rates up and we have inflation going up at the same time, because since the policy rate started going up gradually, maintains, goes up marginally, now it's gone up 0.4. We've also seen inflation rise at the same time. Why is this so? What's the correlation?
If you look at it, actually the increase in the policy rate was supposed to help the central bank to control inflation and also to stabilize the local currency. But what you realize is that when they increase the policy rate, it means that it will help them to mobilize excess liquidity from the economy, which can help to stabilize the cedi and prices as well. However, if they do that and government keeps spending and pumps the money back into the economy, in the end they wouldn't achieve the desired effect. That is why it
brings us back to government spending.
Yes, government spending. We need to control that, because the key reason for the rising inflation has been the depreciation of the cedi, because we are an import-dependent economy where we import for wholesale and retail. And so, when we bring the goods in, because of the depreciation, you see people increasing the cedi prices for their goods on a daily or weekly basis. But beyond that, another factor has been the level of government spending. While the central bank tries to absorb the money from the system, you see government spending more and sending it back into the economy.
But the central bank thinks that by 2016, we should see the inflation stand at 8.0 plus or minus 2. Yeah. You find it realistic, because then the bigger problem, which is government spending, hasn't been dealt with.
See, to me, looking at this inflation kind of thing is not purely demand driven. We have a higher rate of cost driven. That is, you have utility increasing. And at the end of the day, I want to focus on the domestic economy, which is key and critical, because my brother has just discussed about the import-driven aspect, which is the buying goods from other economies and then pumping it into our economy. But looking at the domestic economy, where you have utility bills, electricity going up, even we don't have sufficient power to fuel industries. They're depending on plants, and then the cost is relatively higher should they depend on electricity. So at the end of the day, the cost of producing goods and services will increase, lot of cost, and that will trigger the inflation in the economy. So once we don't tackle that, one would have expected that the inflation is likely to go above what they have anticipated. Then another issue has to do with what my brother just said. If you borrow from the domestic economy, and as Doug just said, you use it to fuel or support current expenditure, what it means, you use it to pay wages and salary, and also to support some government expenditure, and you don't invest it into productive or investment areas that will have a multiple effect on the economy, then it will be like a cycle. You mop the money from the system.
In the central bank's view, though admitted some of these recurrent situations with a huge wage bill, governments borrowing, and the energy crisis, they hopes that these things will be dealt with, especially with the bailout from the IMF, and hence by 2016 we should see some changes. From what you said, you see the same happening?
No, it's possible. It's all about the discipline, our discipline in terms of our expenditure. And then IMF have said it clear, and we all know. You see, so if government cannot, operate within the budget, if government cannot discipline itself, and then maybe, due to certain political expediency, you want to, spend anyhow, and then especially now that we are approaching an election year, if that discipline is not, adhered to, then one would have, I would say that it would be very difficult for Bank of Ghana to buy. It's possible.
My challenge, though, is I'm not sure the IMF was going to stay here forever.
No.
Right. And so then it will be sustainability of that discipline after we have been forced to achieve it. How do we sustain it? How do we make sure that government, after it's been able to achieve whatever discipline, however it's able to, we sustain it? Dr. Banyako?
In this regard, I've always shared the view that our own version of the IMF should be the parliament, the legislature, because every borrowing, every government expenditure is approved by them. And so to sustain the discipline that the IMF will bring in, hopefully, in the short term, there should be an arm of government. And by our constitution, that's what it's supposed to be, which will discipline government, ensure that they don't spend outside its means. And so if the parliament is going to behave the same way it has behaved over the years, to the extent that once you have majority in government, so long as you are the ruling government, everything that you send to parliament, you're going to get your way, then I'm sorry. I mean, once the IMF finishes the program and goes out, we'll be back to square one. And I think I'm not surprised that after several rounds of IMF programs and projects in Ghana, we go back to the same thing, because our institutions as far as I'm concerned, are not working as well as they should. I mean, we know our borrowing, what should be our borrowing limit based on how much we are earning as a country in terms of revenue. But let's say government comes to Parliament mid-year and says that even though I wasn't able to receive the amount of revenue that I budgeted to receive at the beginning of the year, I want you to approve more spending till the end of the year. And for me, I don't see how which poor man does that in their private homes. That I'm not getting the money that I'm getting, but I want to spend more. I think Parliament needs to do a better job at serving as IMF. I'm sure if Parliament was doing this work right, we don't need the IMF to come in and discipline government.
But beyond checking how much we spend, should we be concerned with what we spend our money on?
Well, I said that already. That I mean, and my brother also reiterated that if we get the revenues and even the borrowings, if we borrow and we spend it on recurrent expenditure, paying bills here and there, and not invest in things that will bring us, returns, which will have ripple effects on other sectors of the economy, which have connectivity to other sectors of the economies, which allows us to reduce the bottlenecks in the operations of the private sector. Then we'll come back to the same level. It's really also about what we spend the money on, and that is where we need to rethink the whole structure of the economy. Everybody talks about the structure of the economy not being right, the structure of our spending not being right. Probably it's time for us to holistically and once and for all look at it, because taking those, and the reason why, let's look at some of the figures. Last year's budget, it showed that the donors only gave us 33% of what we actually budgeted for. And that's one of the challenges we faced in 2013, was that the donors decided to cut back on their support, because probably they are looking at what you are spending their taxpayers' monies on, and that is not what they think you should be spending your monies on. So we need to do a little bit more on policy credibility as well. When we say we need money for item 1, 2, and 3, once we get the money, you spend it on 1, 2, and 3 with the hope that it will generate returns. But if we take the donors' money and we cannot see the results, because if you speak to the donor community, sometimes these are the expressions that comes from the discussions. And as a country, we need to seriously think about this, because in the long run, the whole issue of the IMF coming in is that they are going to do the same disciplining, i.e., if we give you money for balance of payments to shore you up, you cannot do this, that, and that. And we can do it ourselves without having to, get them involved. Homegrown policies, yes, I believe in it, but the discipline to implement them, I think that's what is lacking.
Well, Dr. Banyok, I'm going to have you hold on at this point. Now, Sulemana and perhaps Daniel, I'd have you think about this also when I come to you. So we want to turn things around, but we already have a debt stock. We have our donors not supporting us as they used to, but we have a budget to finance at the same time. Now the question would be, should we expect more borrowing in the future, or how is government going to generate the funds?
Okay, having a look at that, I think one of the key issues in government discussions with IMF has been how to slow down spending significantly and how to get the government to reduce the level of borrowing in the domestic market. Once government is able to reach a decision with the IMF, we expect the IMF to support government with some funds to execute the budget. And once we agree the program with IMF, it means that a lot more people will have confidence in the economy, and at that point we should see donor funding coming into the country immediately after we reach a reform program with the IMF. I think that most donors are waiting for us to reach an agreement with the IMF. Then they are sure that we are implementing.
But that is until we actually get the green light that it is happening.
Yes, which is what we expect by the end of the year. If that doesn't happen, then we will be in a more difficult situation in early 2015 if we fail to reach an agreement with the IMF by that point.
Daniel, Are we in deep trouble when it comes to that? Because then everything we seem to be talking about now seems to be hinged on the bailout we are going in for. Very, very positive that indeed this bailout will be coming through for us. But in the event that we don't, it does not come through for us. I don't know the possibility of that though. But it doesn't come through for us. How do we generate revenue, pay off some of the debts, stop borrowing, and yet donor funding that's not exactly coming?
Oh, okay. Before I explain it, let me take you from the last point. You know, borrowing is, in this sense, is not that bad.
At all.
Not at all.
But aren't we at a bad point already?
But the capacity to repay is the question that we should be considering. And then the second issue is, when you borrow, where are you investing that money? So if you can borrow money and invest it into energy, now for the next decade, we're not going to have this kind of energy crisis we have in the country. That we'll have energy to fuel industries, that our industries can produce 24/7 and generate the necessary profit that government can have its portion in terms of taxation.
I mean, basically, that's what we've been talking about over the last few minutes. But if that is the instance, government needs to raise more money from within. It's plugging the loopholes, all right. So we'll plug in the loopholes again. What is settle the matter when it comes to revenue generation for government?
Oh, we need to reform our domestic economy. For instance, we have so many people, you know, doing good business and they are not paying taxes, and we don't have any record. So we need to be serious and focus on our internal revenue generation, which is very key and critical. Then the second issue that I've been telling people is that, yes, it's good to generate sufficient revenue. There again, if you generate more and your expenditure increases far above the revenue, you're going to be in trouble. So it is as well, it is good to generate revenue, but we should equally be looking at our expenditure. Now, we have so many social interventions that I believe in them, but it has no proper business model. And when you have any social intervention without a proper business model, what it means is that at the end of the day, value for money will not be achieved. And when so it's like what the accountant calls sunk cost. You are just pumping money into an venture that will not, you know, it will not bring any returns. You know, I wouldn't like to mention some of these interventions, but one would have advised managers of this economy that whatever...
You feel there are some social interventions
that have no value for money. They are good, but the model, the business thinking model is wrong. And because of that, a lot of money has been wasted in such interventions. Let me give a practical example.
You should, because I'm confused. I don't know why it's a social intervention.
No, let's take what's the name? This JIDA, the SUBA, and then the interventions, and then the rest. They are very good. That they are help to support the people, generate revenue for the people. But the business model is wrong. So monies were given to people without proper internal control mechanisms, and we all know what happened. And no accountability, and then we just sit down, we pump a lot of money, nothing is being done. So when you create an intervention, let me give you another one about the YES program. The last time I listened to Honorable Ayariga on Joy FM, a question was asked as to whether the beneficiary will repay the loan. That is one. And the second issue is as to whether there's any interest to be paid, if any. And the answer he provided is like, it's a money that will be given to them to support. A very good intervention, but the business model, so far as I'm concerned, is wrong. Why should you give money to a potential entrepreneur without considering the repayment and any interest payable? So how do you get your money back and reinvest it into another social intervention? So we should be looking at all this.
Suleiman, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I mean, just on the widening our revenue base, as you mentioned, we need to widen our tax base. But beyond that, I feel that there is a lot of leakages in terms of revenues.
Wait, I want you to explain the widened tax base. Exactly how do you mean? Because then, when this is said, two meanings come out of it. Introducing more taxes or increasing what we already have. So which one are we talking about? Just so my viewers can...
I think that there are certain businesses where they don't get the needed attention and they are able to get away without paying taxes. And we need to get all these people on board. We must have a systematic program where we can follow the growth of companies from when they are startups or SMEs to when they grow to become bigger companies, so that once we follow that growth trend, we make sure that they are in the tax net from the beginning. And I think that is lacking. I think we have a lot of SMEs and other businesses in the informal sector who don't pay a lot of taxes, and we need to do that. But as he mentioned, beyond that, we need to control spending as well, and actually where we spend the money. But as consumers, me and you also have a responsibility on our part to help government in this regard, in terms of we also need to support the consumption of locally made goods. I think we import certain goods that we have local substitutes. Why don't we patronize the local substitutes?
I think that's a conversation that we've had time without number. I still can't figure out why we haven't been able to get to the point we wish to. I don't know if you've managed to find an answer to that. Why we know that there are some imports we can do without, and we still have them. Why can't we take a strong stance as we did on rice importation?
Well, I think basically it also has to do with the level of the quality of the products that you produce, because obviously consumers will compare it with the imported products to see which meet their quality requirements. And in that regard, as my brother mentioned earlier, we could have better interventions in the economy, where we could actually help some of these made in Ghana companies to boost the level of quality of products that they produce.
Dr. Banyako, what would be your take on increasing government's revenue generation base?
Definitely, the issue about widening the tax base, ensuring that a lot more people pay taxes instead of going after the same people and asking them to pay more. So I think your confusion was the discussion between the depth and the breadth of the tax net. The depth meaning that obviously those who are already paying, who are identified, are being asked to pay more, and the breadth is asking more people to pay, so that the burden is shielded by a lot more people or organizations than what exists. The challenge with widening the breadth is that, in the first place, we need to properly resource the tax collection agencies, because it's more difficult bringing a lot more people into the next. So you are asking yourself, what is the extra benefit of increasing spending on the tax organization, and how much more money it will bring in? So, for instance, if you can target one company who gives you 200,000 Ghana cedis a month as tax, and ask them to pay an extra 10,000 more, as against going after some small firms, each of them gives you 100. How many of them would you get to be able to give you the extra 20,000? So the challenge has always been for the tax collecting agency to say, well, I'm more comfortable with asking the person who pays 200,000 to pay an extra 10,000 instead of going to chase 1,000 other firms to ask them to pay 20 Ghana cedis each. So the cost of collecting the money itself is a challenge. So this is the reason why we know that we need to widen the tax base, but we don't get around to do it, because sometimes in the short run it costs a lot more to widen it than asking the same people to pay more. But I think in the long run, when you widen the tax base, it is more beneficial to the country than insisting on the same people pay, because it gets to a stage they get tax fatigue, i.e. they then need to look at tax avoidance, because there's a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax evasion is a crime, tax avoidance is not. That is doing things that ensure that I don't fall into a particular tax bracket. That's tax avoidance. Tax evasion is being liable to pay a particular amount of tax and not paying. And so when you tax the same people for a long time, they begin to look at tax avoidance and mechanisms. And then in the long run, you might end up getting less revenue than when you're even taxing them at a lower rate. So these are all these are things that the government and the tax collecting agencies need to toss around and think through before when they decide at any point in time we want to increase the tax rate, because it's the easier option to take. Secondly, bottlenecks, like my brother suggested, like the energy crisis, actually affect the ability of companies to even pay tax. because most taxes are, prorated. I mean, the more you produce and the more you earn, the more you pay, isn't it? So if there's energy challenges and we are cutting down on production, where does government get its revenue from? So the energy crisis is not just an issue with the private sector, i.e. having problems for the private sector, but it also creates challenges for government's own revenue because it affects total output. And so that is why we think, where I sit, think that the energy challenge is a binding constraint that we need to critically look and solve once and for all. Because when we say it's a binding constraint, it means it affects virtually every aspect of our lives as a country, from the production sector to our everyday life, to the quality of life and everything. And so it's a binding constraint that we need to take it a bit more seriously and deal with it more holistically than the thing we have done over the recent past. So,
let me wrap it up with you on the city. Should we expect what we see now for the rest of the year and perhaps into 2015 as well, the relative stability of the city?
Well, one of the things, one of my friends suggested, for instance, one of the things that will affect the city in itself, because I think it's getting some relative stability through a couple of issues. These issues that have been over, let's say, which has been discussed over and over again, the cocoa, the euro bond, the cocoa money, all coming in. And I also believe expectations. It has also had to do with expectations. I think maybe we have not looked at it a bit more. The expectations that we're going to get an IMF to come in and probably discipline us and make sure that we don't do what we are not supposed to do calms the market, gives the market the impression that things might improve. If things are going to improve, then it has an effect on the value of the domestic currency. And so I think the stability we are getting now also borders on the positive expectations that people have about what is going to happen in the economy. But if we are able to get into these IMF discussions, as my brother said, that it gives even external investors the confidence to bring their money in. If that is going to happen and we are going to be able to sign a deal with the IMF, it should for some time, in the medium term, calm the nest for some time and allow us to enjoy some stability. But if on the other hand, we are not able to do it and people think that the government will go back to a more the regular indisciplined fiscal stance, then they don't expect the economy to improve, and it has expectation effects on the domestic currency. If we could also see the energy crisis resolving, which means that we expect output to increase, which allows us to export more, and we're expecting more foreign currency into the economy, then it also will give the city some stability. But I dare to say that some people still think that the city is overvalued.
I see.
Some analysts think that the city is overvalued.
Do you agree with them? You think the city is overvalued?
Well, I mean, some calculations can be done. Some calculations were done to show that they think that this is not the real value of the city, and we are shoring it up with this euro bond and the cocoa purchase figures and those things. And that is the reason why they don't think that the city's stability will last for long.
Doc, we'll leave it here for now. Thank you very much. Dr. Kwame Banuako is Senior Vice President, Strategic Planning and Research with the Royal Bank. But still here with me in the studio are my two gentlemen, Suleiman and Mohammed to my far left, Financial Research Specialist with EcoBank Development Corporation Ghana office. And to my immediate left is Daniel Inimprempe. He's a certified economist. Let's talk about the city. I think we have a few minutes to wrap it up. Let's talk about the city. Has it come to stay, the stability we are seeing?
From my point of view, I think raising the policy rate by 200 basis points is going to support the city until we get an IMF program by the end of this year.
But it's going to squeeze us as well.
Yes, I mean, the expectation of the possibility of an IMF program coming in is going to still boost investor confidence until then. However, the major risk then is if we fail to agree a program with the IMF by early 2015, then we could see the cedi depreciate in early 2015. But I don't expect that to go that far. I believe that
you're confident of the IMF
that knowing the vulnerability of the macroeconomic environment, the government will do very well to agree a program with the IMF by the end of the year. Otherwise, the current confidence that we have,
even if it's going to have a sour consequence for the Ghanaian people.
Well, I am not sure about that.
Perhaps we would have to face the sour bit before the sweet comes.
Yes, more likely.
I'm not sure how many Ghanaians are ready for that. For instance, when you talk about the taxes, I'm not sure how many Ghanaians are ready to pay new taxes, different taxes. I mean, look at the communication tax, the kind of controversy it created. When government said, when the GRA said it was going out to take property tax, people were unhappy about it. So the Ghanaian people themselves, we are not ready to pay more taxes. And so I'm not sure if there should be conditions that may make the Ghanaian people a bit uncomfortable one way or the other, or pinch them a little if they'll be happy about it. But perhaps we might have to swallow the bitter pill first, or?
Oh, sure.
But
the point is that, you see, it's all about the confidence, you know, telling the people that this is the way forward. You know, as you said, you need to swallow the bitter pill. But at the end of the day, you know, it must yield a fruitful dividend. If at the end of the day nothing good comes out from that, it is then that the citizens will, you know, complain.
So maybe that's why people don't like taxes.
So because over the years, you know, sacrifice, but at the end of the day, it's like we are in the same the same cycle. No, we operate within the same business. But if policymakers or the managers of the economy will work very hard and ensure that they've turned things around, of course, everybody will say, oh yeah, at the end of the day, there's light at the time.
And also, I think it's not about getting the same people to pay different taxes. As Doc mentioned, there are other people who are not paying already. And probably the immediate cost of getting those people to pay taxes is much higher. But over the long term, it's the way to go.
Would you advise, is it a good time to invest?
In Ghana?
Is it a good time?
I mean, obviously, with
rising inflation, tightening policy rate, lending rates are likely to go up. Is it a good time to invest?
Yeah, okay, sorry.
No, let him take it first.
Given that the policy rate has gone up, I mean, tomorrow the Bank of Ghana will have the weekly auction of treasury bills. I expect the short end of the market to go up. I mean, the 91-day and the 182 treasury bills, the interest rate on that will go up. So that should attract some funds from investors. Yes, you will benefit from higher rates on the treasury market. Yes, so it's a good time to invest in the treasury market.
I see. Daniel,
I think he has landed.
Those few words.
Well, I say yes, depending where you invest in. You know, just like my Suleiman have just said, he has just look at the money market,
the money market. That's true.
Of course, if that is your target, you know, that place is juicy and fruitful. You can get something from there. But you see, we're running an economy that, to me, as an investor, yes, it will benefit you, because at the end of the day, consumers are there for you to, you know, swallow the bulk.
My fear, though, is that people might not be able to borrow.
That's true, because as the policy rate goes up, and it's likely that the government will crowd out the private sector, because more people will feel comfortable giving their money to the government, which is risk-free. Why should I give it to you? And there's the likelihood that you will default in paying. So that fear is there.
So people, this could have effect on households, on businesses.
Yes, it could have effect. And
it could.
That's what we were talking about.
Because I'm raising. I'll let you make that point. I'm raising this point because then the government, the central bank indicated that credits now, the credits easiness was high. My thinking is that it's more like people do not have an option as to where they can get money from, and that's why the credit seems to be easy now. Sure. The credit is available, but it's expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive.
So it's basically not the same thing, is it?
Yes, it's expensive, and that would deter people from borrowing. And also, most people will feel comfortable giving it to the central bank where it is risk-free. Because when interest rates are high, it's most likely that people will default or they will have difficulties in repaying their loans.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll see how this pans out in the business world over the next few months when, well, we hope that we don't get such a bad situation. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Suleimana Mohammed is financial research analyst with EcoBank Development Corporation, and Daniel Enim Prempe is a certified economist. We've been talking about the monetary policy committee's pegging of policy rate at 21% from 19%, and inflation also rising from 16.5% to 16.9% for the month of October. I'll be right back. Don't go away.